What's up, party people out in the Angular community? My name is Mark from the Angular team, and I am here with some fantastic folks to talk all about some new changes that we're planning for Angular. We'll be talking about the built-in control flow RFC, and we'll be talking about deferred loading. This, right now, wherever you are, this is the time to get those questions answered and to actually engage with us and talk about these changes. Maybe they're impacting the way you're going to do things. Maybe you want to know more about the reasons why we're doing this. Listen, everything's fair game, but be mindful to keep the code of conduct in mind. We got to be kind and respectful to one another, because then guess what happens? We all can have a good time. If you're ready for some action, here's what I need you to do. In the comments right now, in the chat, I need some stars. Put the star emoji. Let us know that you are shining bright wherever you are. All right. Now, while you're doing that, friends, let me introduce some people who are in the building. We got Alex Rickabar, we got Jessica Janik, and we got Andrew Kushner, all from the Angular team. All these brilliant engineers ready to do stuff. We got some thunderclaps. I see that. Let's go. Thunderclaps from Next Level. Let's go. Marcus, so did anyone get a chance to meet Marcus at NGConf in Utah? Marcus is so cool. It's one of the just really great parts of the community. So glad to have you here. Thank you. And Nia, you've been waiting for a while. Thank you for coming by and hanging out with us. I see the stars. Oh, it's Alcatraz 01. Okay, I love Alcatraz because they always come to the streams, and they're always themselves, and I just love their energy. So big shout out to Alcatraz 01. Thanks for being yourself. Thanks for coming. Let's see who we got. We got Jay Bell in the building. Jay Bell in the building. What's good? All right. I see the stars. That lets me know that we can get started. I'm going to share the screen, the slides, and then let's start off with Alex and the built-in control flow RFC. Oh, wait, before you start, Alex, we got to give a big shout out to somebody else who's here. He said he wants to be off camera, but we got our man Kevin Callanan in the building. Kevin's here. So big shout out to Kevin, always holding us down. So thank you, Kevin. Everybody wave to Kevin. All right. So everybody's waving. There you go, Kevin. So we see you. You're in the building. All right. Alex, why don't you just walk us through the control flow RFC?
Yeah, let's do it. So a couple weeks ago, we posted a new RFC. If you were at NGConf, you saw that it happened kind of live on camera, which was a lot of fun for us to put together. But actually, this is something we've been thinking about for a long time. We have been thinking about kind of changing the way that Angular does control flow and templates, the way that we specify parts of the UI that should be conditional, that should be repeated, and also, like, spoiler, that should be lazy loaded, right? And there's a few reasons behind this. Signals and the kind of thinking around signal components is one of the things that prompted us to kind of look at this now and try to take this design a bit further. But there are kind of other developer experience challenges that we've seen with the way our structural directives work for control flow. Things like template type checking, things like the order of different elements visually in the template. The fact that like else with ngIf is a very awkward experience. That's something that we definitely wanted to try to address at some point. And as we iterated on the design, we started with the control flow directives and like, can we change these? Can we improve them? Can we teach the framework more about how to type check things like switch? But we also took a look across the rest of the ecosystem and how other technologies attempt to solve this problem. And what we saw was that there were a lot of benefits that were out of reach as long as we were treating control flow as something that gets implemented in the directive space, something that kind of is implemented in user space in the framework instead of as a built-in part of our templating language. And other systems out there kind of do have control flow syntax built in, and they don't have the problems that we have. And so we started playing around with, if it were built in, what would it look like? And this is the syntax that we came up with. So single curly braces are kind of already a template escape in Angular. This allows us to kind of use that hook to kind of put in new syntax without it being a massively breaking change. And we were kind of inspired by the way Svelte does this, which was, also inspired by Mustache in the past, going back even to AngularJS days. It's all a circle of innovation, as Sarah would say. But yeah, this is the syntax. So you have these kind of block declarations. You start with the hash symbol as the kind of main block. And then it just kind of looks like TypeScript from there down, right? If the state is logged in, then we show one thing. Else if is cool that we can do that, right? That's not something that was really possible with ngIf before. Someone mentioned the ng source on here probably wouldn't work or would throw a warning. Yeah, probably. We didn't actually run this. It's not built yet. Yeah, but then you have else if and else, and finally you kind of HTML style close out the if block with a slash. So Mark, you can go to the next slide. And so that was if. For kind of looks very similar. We have a for loop for user of users. One of the cool things here is that we can specify track by in a much better way. If you've written track by functions in Angular, they have to be functions in your component class. They have kind of a set of arguments that they pass that you have to remember the order of. It's not very intuitive. And often what you want to do is just say like, this is my ID, track it on the, this property. And we had to do it that way because we're using a directive input for track by to ng4. But when the syntax is built in, we can have more ergonomic ways of doing it. So here we can just directly say like, I want to track the user.id. And we can do other things for that weren't possible before, like next slide. For example, if the array is empty or hasn't loaded yet, you can have an empty template that you specify what to show in the UI if no rows would be rendered. And we can go to the next slide, I think. Yeah, so that's control flow. The RFC kind of goes into a bit more detail about how this will work, how this will type check, but in general, this is the idea.
Yeah, sorry for the missing your other slide, Alex.
No, it's fine. Actually,
okay.
I thought this was the end, and we'd move on to the, talk about Defer.
Well, so before we do that, I saw some good comments that I would love to address with the community, if that's fine. First comment is from somebody called, let's see, what are they called here? I just saw them there. Jessica Janik. They said, thanks for keeping us on track, Mark. Jessica. Oh.
Just doing my job.
No, that's good. But one of our
since we hired Jessica, since she joined the Angular team a couple of years ago now, I think the number of puns in team meetings has skyrocketed. It's constant.
Yep, up and to the right, always. That's pretty good though. So a good community member, always in the streams, always engaging with us. Mugatu says this is going to impact ng template. Can you talk about that, Alex? Like, how does this impact the use of the ng template? How is it going to change things for us?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. One is one of the challenges with ngIf in the past has been how you handle switching multiple components or multiple child parts of your template on or off together. And there were a couple ways of doing that. One is to use ng template and put the ngIf directive on ng template directly. So kind of not going through the star structural directive syntax. The other was to wrap it in an ng container and put the ng container with an ngIf on or off. So with the new syntax, that's kind of baked in. You don't need a element like an HTML-like element to put the control flow directive on. You can wrap a bunch of nodes this way without that. Otherwise, ng template in the kind of de-sugared form of structural directives is absolutely a part of Angular and not changing. We're not removing structural directives. You'll still be able to use ng template for doing kind of custom control flow things. You just won't need to use it with ngIf else.
And so I think it'd be worth just talking about quickly our commitment to existing applications with this. We're not going to break everybody, right? Alex, can we confirm that for people that we're not going to just introduce this syntax and then your Angular apps previous to the launch will just stop working?
They will not stop working. We are kind of actively discussing what we want to do about like the timeline for migrating people to the new syntax. I think we're generally in agreement that we would prefer to have, Angular is one of the things people like about it. It's an opinionated framework. We would prefer to have one way to do control flow and not two or more. So fortunately, we believe it will be possible to automatically migrate 99.9% of existing templates from ngIf, ngFor, etc., to the new syntax automatically. So we will bring you with us. The only the 0.01% there is actually, there are some really weird edge cases where if you're doing things like querying for the control flow directive specifically, that probably wouldn't work. If you're doing that, please talk to me, because the first thing I will ask you is why. But yeah, and we have some kind of options for opting out there. But yes, no plans to break applications.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. And Mugatu, thank you for that question. Let's keep this party going. So Chaos Monster says, will we stay with the phrase block declaration, asking for future reference on how to address them, how to identify them or call them?
Yeah, I think we've called them blocks in the RFC and in internal design docs. That seems to have stuck.
So, okay. Hopefully that isn't a blocking issue for people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think TypeScript uses the same language internally. So after an if statement, if you have open curly braces, that's called a block of statements.
All right, awesome. Here's a great question. Oh, well, we'll save that one. Let's see, J4 no. We see this question. I have it in my queue to get to, but we're going to talk about it when we get to the deferred stuff. So we have not forgotten about you. All right, let's talk a little bit more about this. Was JSX ever considered?
Ooh, yes, to be honest. And there's actually an Easter egg in the ngconf keynote presentation that we gave. So if you go look at the some of Minko's slides, he shows a picture of the Angular team working together in a conference room. And if you zoom in on the whiteboard, the thing we're actually doing is kind of like experimenting with what would Angular look like with JSX syntax. Which is, we do think about these things. We're always willing to make a change as long as that change has a net benefit, as long as it's an improvement. That said, JSX actually doesn't work super well for Angular because it's based on an entirely different paradigm. It's based on a paradigm that the template is something you execute and it returns a value. And this works in a framework like React, because in React, you run the template, it evaluates your expressions, it returns VDOM, and then the VDOM gets diffed with the current UI. And in Angular, actually, we don't kind of execute your template to return kind of the new shape of what the page should look like. Angular understands that your template has static places and there are these data bindings that get poked inside them. So because we don't re-execute the expressions in the template, JSX actually doesn't really fit super well. And that gets particularly worse when you look at TSX and the way the typings work out. The typings just don't line up entirely and would be a super awkward experience to use. That said, there are a lot of things we like about JSX and some of the experience that it creates for you. And there's no reason why we can't evolve Angular templates to have similar experiences.
All right, let's do a couple more questions and then we'll give the floor over to our control flow team. Sorry, to the deferred team. Let's see. I love the NG team. Thank you, Tomer. We appreciate you and value you as well. Here's the question. In the RFC, we saw some alternatives to the proposed syntax. Is it look like the community prefer? Oh, it looks like the community prefers the @ symbol if condition syntax instead of the curly brace pound if. Maybe a poll will help. So I guess there are different things we proposed here, Alex. Are we leaning toward a certain way at this point?
Ooh, I'm so happy someone asked about this actually. And I we will never post an RFC if we're not willing to kind of change our minds or change direction in response to new ideas or new information, right? So we're always kind of looking at the feedback. When we go to RFC, we have some idea of the direction we want to go. We've done usually at that point a lot of research into the experience that we're defining. But when new ideas come up, we give them full consideration. And this is actually a case where a new idea has come up that in like some of us feel that it is actually better. At least on this is kind of a very new thing. We're still looking at this idea and seeing maybe, how does it compare in all depths of the experience? But we are actually going to be considering this syntax. So we'll be talking about it as a team. And if it seems like this is an improvement on the current design, we'll probably post another revision of the RFC.
Okay. So if I would say back what I think I just heard from you, we're listening, we're considering, and then things are not set in stone just yet with the syntax.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. But functionality, I think that we're pretty much set that this is what we want to do, but we're still cementing the
it doesn't change the overall direction of we want to kind of bake control flow into the framework. But there are some advantages to the @ style syntax that we like. So it needs further investigation on our part.
Okay, great. All right, let's see. Let's take one. Okay, I see a couple more questions about this that I do want to tackle here with us. Let's see. Let's go with this question from Roman. Hello, maybe I missed something, but will switch statements support discriminated unions and similar type assertions? Big TypeScript question, sounds like.
Yes, it will. Switch in our templates should have the same behavior as switch in TypeScript. So if you have a type union in your condition that is narrowed by a particular case, it should do the same thing it does in TypeScript code.
All that fancy language. I love it. All right.
Yeah.
Wait, but then here's a question from me about that. We use Angular expression syntax usually in our templates. So it looks like JavaScript or TypeScript code, but it's actually not exactly that. Is that still the case here with the control flow stuff?
That is still the case. So the points in here, like users, right, is an expression. And that's a Angular template language style expression, which means you can use things that aren't in the JavaScript language like pipes, but it also means that you can't use things which are in TypeScript but are not in the Angular language. So typecasting and like calling new on things and declaring classes and functions. And there's a large part of TypeScript that doesn't work in Angular templates. Over time, we want to close this gap. We want to make the Angular language less special. There is some discussion of like, should it be at all special? Should it be just TypeScript? There are certain things like, in TypeScript, you can just say let X equals class and create an entire class definition and methods and everything else kind of in an expression. I don't know whether that's something that I would ever say should be in a template. So I don't know if we would want to do a huge amount of work to support it. So there's kind of edge cases there, but generally speaking, we want Angular's template language to be mostly TypeScript.
Okay, excellent. So here's what we're going to do right now, friends. We're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about the deferred loading stuff with Angular server-side rendering, etc. And then we're going to answer questions. But right after they get the chance to go through their questions about their RFC, we're then just going to take all questions related to both topics at the same time, and then any other Angular questions that you may have, because I know that people love talking to you folks directly and getting the answers directly from the team. So let's make this party get started here, and we're going to switch over to deferred loading with Andrew Kushner and Jessica Janet. All right, let's tell our friends what this is all about. Over to you.
Okay, so what you're looking at here is a component that has a template, and the deferred loading syntax actually exists within your template syntax. So it's not like something that you define like on the component decorator. You actually put it in your template code. So you have a defer block, and then you have several different options that you can use with it. So with the main defer declaration at the top, you can declaratively put either on or when to specify when your block of code that's within that block will actually trigger its lazy loading. So like in this case, we have a viewport, which is a pre-specified condition where we will actually provide that symbol for you of viewport, and that will essentially handle when the thing enters the viewport. There's a few other predefined conditions like on interaction and a few others. Idle state as well. There's I think a timer. I'm trying to remember all of them that we have. And then just like with the control flow, you can also use an expression with when. So you can say defer when, write your own expression. You can also combine these if you would like to. You can have a when and an on. You can have multiple ons if you would like. So a lot of flexibility in what you would like to do. Or I believe the way we have it kind of defined in the RFC is you can have multiple things specified in the on rather than multiple ons. But if I'm remembering that correctly. And yeah, then anything within that defer block is essentially lazy loaded at that point. So in this case, the calendar CMP component is then fetched and loaded in all of its dependencies. And if you had multiple components within that block or directives and pipes, those would be fetched as well at that point. Then there's the separate sections that you see below with the loading and the error. So loading is what shows when the actual fetch is occurring. So during the loading that is taking place, as soon as the defer has triggered, you'll get that loading template. So you can put whatever you want within there, components, whatever. That content will be eagerly loaded rather than deferred loaded inside the loading block, and then same with the error block. So if something happens during the fetch and there's an actual error where it failed to fetch something or some error occurred, you will get the ability to specify that error template as well. There's an additional one that's not displayed here called placeholder that essentially shows before any of the deferred loading happens. So it's very similar to loading an error. It's just called placeholder. And just like loading an error, those are eagerly loaded. So you have those three potential options that you can use, and then you have your block of deferred loading that has the stuff that actually will be lazy loaded within it. And that's the basics of what's in the RFC. There's a bit more in there, like there's some options along with loading, like a minimum amount of time to be shown before it switches over to the defer. That also works for the placeholder, so that you don't have quick flickers of loading and placeholder in the case that the deferred content loads very fast. There's some additional configuration options for the defer block as well. So hopefully that's a quick, useful summary of this defer block syntax.
Okay, we have a lot of questions about the syntax here and some of the functionality. So Jessica, thank you for doing this. So Andrew and Jessica are going to answer your questions. And Alex, of course, I'm not sure if you can help answer. I'm sure you'll be able to support. But first, let's start with this question. excuse me, our friend J4No, maybe that's a Java reference. Maybe is that a Java reference? Maybe. Can we make Angular more SEO friendly in the future? Just from a server side rendering point of view, what steps can we take right now to make an app more SEO friendly?
So the first thing is you can enable hydration. That is, I think, one of the biggest things that like we knew this was an issue for SEO in the past, and we've been asked for it, and that was released as developer preview in v16. So if you do that, you should have a better experience with SEO across the board. There's also the like improvements with the title service that's changed over the last, I think, year. Those are the two things off the top of my head. Andrew, do you have any other thoughts here?
No, I think you covered that. Yeah, I think the server-side rendering is definitely a big step to improve SEO. One thing that I want to mention, though, just to make sure that there's no confusion. So the defer feature is actually the feature that would work for both client-side rendered applications as well as server-side rendered applications. So if you don't use server-side rendering, that's fine. You can still use this feature and get all the benefits. So,
yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
All right, first, we're going to have Kevin moderate for a little bit. I'll be right back.
Sounds groovy. Alrighty. Next question. So, G-Law asks, I heard that switch fall through cases won't be implemented. Why is that?
So by switch fall through cases, that I would call that like an exhaustiveness check for switch, which is basically that you've covered all of the various cases that are possible, or that you don't implement the default case when you have nothing left in your type union that could trigger it. We don't plan to support it because TypeScript doesn't support it, and we get our type checking for templates from TypeScript. So we typically have not tried to implement kind of custom type checking that goes beyond what the TypeScript checker can do. It's a little bit tricky to kind of get an exhaustiveness check out of TypeScript. We could look into building that if there's a strong demand for it, but I would much rather kind of push that upstream and get the TypeScript team to support exhaustively check switch statements in the whole language, and then we'd get it for free.
Hello, friends.
Hey, Charlie.
How's everybody doing?
Sorry. Alrighty, sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so the next question we have is from Jan Niklas asking, is it planned to support custom loading strategies, or is it planned to support lazy loading when the element is in the viewport?
So the viewport thing is just an example here. We have multiple different triggers that we plan to have by default, and viewport is just one of them. So you'll have several different options that you can use, as well as being able to use a when statement and write your own conditions for whenever stuff will be deferred loaded. We have talked about strategy options, and if there's the desire, like the strong desire from people to have reusable strategies, that is something that we could also look into implementing.
yeah, I also wanted to note in this context is that there's also support for prefetching, and prefetching have similar conditions like on and when. So this gives even more flexibility in terms of like how you want to and when you want to load resources. So yeah, take a look at the preloading as well. Prefetching, I should say.
Okay. And then we have a question from Umair asking if we can have nested defer blocks.
The short answer here is yes, but there are potential situations where you could de-optimize your app if you do it wrong. So we're going to try to do our best to prevent you from doing that. In other words, you could like defer and then have an immediate trigger and then have a defer and an immediate trigger and a defer and an immediate trigger, and suddenly you're like triggering a whole bunch of different requests over and over again. There are cases where we can detect that we'll do our best to do that. But there are also cases where you will have to be vigilant about making sure you don't de-optimize your app yourself. And we'll have this in our docs for the defer block when this eventually releases, so that you can be aware of that particular use case, so you can avoid it as an anti-pattern.
Alrighty, thank you. Matthew Whitfield asks, can I turn deferred loading on or off depending on the user agent? Otherwise, any continue in my defer block won't get seen by search engine crawlers, e.g. Googlebot.
I think at the start, the answer here is no. We hadn't really considered user agent as part of this API. Again, this is a case where, like, if we got a ton of feedback that this is something that people would like to see, this is something we could maybe look at as a future improvement to the defer behavior down the road. But at the onset, definitely we had not considered the user agent as part of the triggering system.
I'll chime in a little bit. So one of the challenges would be that, like, defer is actually a build time feature. It affects how your code gets split apart into different modules, and it inserts an asynchronous boundary at this point. So in some ways, it kind of, you can't switch it off in any way. Even the most aggressive trigger like defer on immediate still will need to make a network request to load the code. Where I think like this intersects with SEO and Googlebot is, if you need to verify, or if you need to ensure or control what Googlebot sees when it visits your site, you should be server-side rendering. And in that case, you have more control over which blocks get triggered, which don't, in your kind of server rendered page. Andrew, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I just want to mention that the when condition can be also kind of an escape hatch in this case. So if any of the on condition do not cover the use case that you have, you can always use when and do the necessary checking yourself. And also share the feedback. So if something is missing, if there are some missing on conditions that you would like to see, we'll be interested in hearing more about that, about the use cases. And there are comments in the RFC with some use cases, and thanks a lot to everyone who shared that.
And I would also expect like defer with an immediate trigger, right? Like I said, the kind of most aggressive form would behave very similarly to lazy loaded routes, right? Where unless you have the router blocking the entire page, you're rendering the app shell and then rendering the content inside of it after the lazy loading step. So in some ways, it's kind of, existing applications already kind of deal with this if it's impacting Googlebot that much.
All right, friends, I'm on mute. No, I'm back, friends. All right, thanks to Kevin for hanging in there. Let's answer some more questions here. Oh, here's a good one from Gabriel de los Rios. Should we prepare for a future? He's looking into the future. Should we prepare for a future without structural directives?
I'm going to consult my magic 8-ball here. Nope. Nope. Structural directives are staying. They're not going anywhere. They're an essential part of how Angular works. They're a core building block for things like the CDK and material. And in general, no control flow system will address all of the cases for when do you need to kind of create dynamic UI. There's always going to be a need for some more customizable system there. So yeah, structural directives are a key part of Angular. We have no plans to remove them.
Core building block, but not a router building block or an animations building block or.
Okay. Josiah Hahn says, is it possible to set what's inside the loading and error globally? Oh, okay. So I think this is like thinking big picture, right? Can I just predefine it and then just have it be reused maybe in places? Is that what the question is?
Looks like that's the case here. The best way to define it globally is to write it in one place and then copy and paste it to every other place that you use it. So the answer here is we had not designed it intentionally that way. We had been considering things like configuration for things like timeouts globally, but we hadn't talked about the content inside loading an error as a global setup. So if that's something that you'd like to see, again, please comment on the RFC and provide that feedback. If we get enough of that feedback, we can consider how we can make that happen.
Someone should make a framework, Jess, where you like instead of copy pasting things around, you have a like some kind of reusable UI piece with a template.
Yeah,
like,
something like that would be great. Yeah.
yeah.
And then I guess you could like use it, give it like a selector, and then you could just like put it places. I don't know. That could be right. That might become a weekend project.
So that is an option too, right? You can create a component and put it in, repeat it.
Yeah.
You still have to repeat it in the thing. So like definitely, we could improve things there if this was a kind of commonly requested use case. But yeah.
I mean, but it could be interesting if the loading syntax just had an ID or selector name in it that it just knew how to retrieve that component, right? That way you could define it someplace else without having to like write the whole thing.
Or even you do have a global configuration in the application. You just name the component that you want to use for a kind of common loading indicator. Like we could support features like that if they're requested enough.
Yeah, request that. So write that in there, like what your vision is for this. Request it. Let us know what you're thinking, because as you can see, as we're discussing right now, we actually consider your feedback, friends. So this isn't something where we've made up our minds and just decided what we're going to do. We're actually just talking about it right now. Like, oh, could that be a possible thing? Awesome. The next level says, the next level, not next, the next level. In an SSR app, will it display the loading block by default until the application is hydrated?
Ooh, this is an exciting one because it's something that we've talked about. We've had a lot of conversations about. At the start, the answer will be no, but that's because we have to do a little bit of additional research and a little bit of additional work before this is something that we can enable. We'd like it to eventually get to this place. So yeah, short-term answer, no. Long-term answer, we are hoping to see that happen.
Yeah, Angular today, we have a shiny new hydration system as implemented by Andrew and Jessica here. But one thing we don't have is the ability to kind of leave components on the page dehydrated until future triggers. So that's kind of the missing piece here before we're able to kind of leave a component in server rendering in the loaded state and hydrate it later whenever someone interacts with it or kind of using our trigger set. Otherwise, I think the problem we're worried about is then you just kind of make the initial hydration effort more expensive because you are now immediately triggering fetches of all these things that you've said are, should be deferred. So we're worried that we could actually regress the initial load performance in that way.
Well, and to add to what you're saying, there is the issue of like, what happens if and when a person interacts with the dehydrated content and they're clicking a button and that button is not doing anything while the fetch is occurring, and then it loads, where did those clicks go? We don't really have a method for retaining that action and replaying it. And that's something that we'll have to figure out over the next number of months. And and once we have a solution there, I think we'll be able to start looking into moving forward with that behavior.
Yeah, everyone has a different kind of definition for this, but I think that's what I would call like partial hydration. And that's something we've mentioned before is kind of in our roadmap. following the kind of current hydration designs.
And I think we're all very partial to the idea.
Okay. E
Mark, like,
Ivan NTT Lil says, what will happen with calls to RxJS using async pipe?
Ooh, I assume this is talking about the way that the kind of pattern for using ngIf and dealing with the fact that async pipe gives you kind of null until the observable produces a value. And so a very common pattern is say ngIf, my observable pipe to async as some template variable. And then inside the ngIf, you can use the template variable as the current value. This is, if you look into how this works with ngIf, it is slightly terrifying. It's not like what you think is happening is not at all what is actually happening to make this feature work. We will support it with the new if syntax implemented in the proper way, the way that you think is happening. But longer term, we think that like signals and the two-signal bridge from RxJS is actually kind of a nicer developer experience than the async pipe. It means you don't have to deal with this null if you don't want to. It supports like specifying initial values and things like that. So I would say look into two-signal, but for now, nothing is going to change with that if pattern. It will still continue to work as it has before.
Okay.
Should templates support await is another fun question.
All right, let's see. We got still lots of questions. Just here's some feedback that I think is helpful for us to see. In my opinion, deleting the hashtag from the syntax will make it easier to write. So something to consider.
Yeah, so Angular supports as part of our I10N internationalization support in templates. We have this thing called ICUs, and ICUs are little localization operations that can happen that use a kind of semi-industry standard syntax for defining them. And that semi-standard syntax actually happens to be open curly brace, some ICU, close curly brace. And so that part of the syntax space is kind of taken. You need the hash there to differentiate these things from the ICUs, unfortunately. So because we try not to make breaking changes, we don't think we can do this without kind of compromising the ICU support that we have today.
We hope that you don't have strong feelings about it, because we felt a certain way about it for sure.
All right. Next level says event-based queuing possibly. So I think this is in response to our questions around where do all those clicks go, and maybe something we consider is event-based queuing. So something it's interesting. That's interesting. The fact that we were talking about what to do in that context is really interesting. If you think about how far web development has come, where before we wouldn't even have thought about it being a reasonable request. I'm like, why do you care about that? But now we're like, well, what happens if we do care? What happens if we do want to keep track? I mean, I think it's so fascinating that web dev is so different. All right. Hey, folks, a bit off topic, but is there any plan to release a new signal-based form API rather than the two current ones, which can be confusing to new Angular users?
Ooh, good. Yeah, this was asked at ngconf a little bit too. And the answer is like no solid plans, but it is definitely on our roadmap as something we would like to get to. The current forms design is a few years old. There are two different form systems. They're actually the same system under the hood, but there's two different interfaces to them that are somewhat incompatible with each other. And that's confusing. There's a lot of discussion in the community as to whether template forms are better or reactive forms are better. Some of that depends on the use case. Some of that, there are weird quirks to each one. I think there's a lot about forms that we would like to revisit and rethink. And we will get to that in the future, probably on top of signals. We'll try to unify these things and see if we can have one forms experience that fixes some of the drawbacks that we've seen in the current two approaches.
And we appreciate your input.
Okay, RM says, could the new control flow be extended to serve? This is another forms question, to serve form control validation, displaying error messages when dirty, invalid, that sort of thing.
Probably not directly in the template language, but I'm very curious to see kind of what patterns come up, especially as we do things like integrate signals into forms. Signals are actually really useful in this case because validation is often one of the places where people see expression change after checked errors. And hopefully we can have some nicer patterns for how to accomplish that.
All right. Mugatu says, so harkening back to our conversation earlier about where track by is a pain, why not make track by mandatory?
I can't help but hear that in Mugatu's actual voice.
Who was Mugatu?
The character.
He's right there in the photo. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know. I just thought this person called themselves Mugatu.
Zoolander reference.
Yes. We will make track by mandatory, actually. This is kind of one of the things we've learned looking at the way the old control flow worked, and having some experience profiling Angular applications, is that missing track by actually is a significant performance foot gun in some cases. If you have an array iterating over 10 items, it's probably okay. But for any kind of big data table, not having track by can cause some real problems in terms of some data changes, and Angular does way more work than is necessary to re-render the entire table. Literally delete the DOM nodes and recreate them, because NG4 kind of makes some conservative assumptions about when it can reuse existing things. So we think and React does this as well, right? In React, if you have an array or some kind of a loop, you give it a key, and the key tells React which things can be reused and which can't. And key is mandatory. So track by will be as well. Yes, you can track by index, looking at Mario in the comments.
Wow, I'm just more shocked that we just dropped a major key, like DJ Khaled would say, a major key right there. Track by could improve your app performance. Alex, you and I should work on a video called like top 10 performance hacks you're not using. And I put track by as like one of the number one, like use track by. That should be a YouTube short. Okay, friends at home, when you see some YouTube shorts with like really clickbaity titles, it was spawned by this conversation, because we're going to make some. All right, let's keep this party going. We have a few more minutes for a few more questions. Does Angular Pipe, Tomer says, does Angular Pipes still need the new computed signals?
Do you still
need Angular Pipes if you have computed signals?
Generally, I think of pipes as a way to kind of call functions in the template with a bit more kind of syntax around them. They do serve similar purposes in a lot of ways. And so many existing pipes, I think, could become kind of functions that get used with computed.
Okay. All right, let's do a speed round. Let's try to get through as many of these as we can. Let's see. Okay. The deferred loading syntax has an error template block. Could we see something like React or Nuxt error boundaries to handle component subtrees that throw errors?
It's possible to imagine. I haven't looked into error boundaries in React or Nuxt specifically. But if you have interesting ideas about that, I think there is a discussion of this a little bit in the control flow RFC. So feel free to chime in and share what you'd like to see. Generally, I would say yes, the new having this ability to have these custom kind of blocks with declarative logic is really cool, because it allows us to do interesting things. Defer is a very interesting thing, right? This is a kind of combination of functionality that is really powerful in a very clean package, because we have this template syntax carve out for it.
Okay. I'm a noob in Angular, or Animus says, I'm a newbie to Angular. Please tell me the right path to learn Angular. Guess what, friend? I can tell you the right path. If you go to the Angular YouTube channel, there is a brand new course that will get you started with Angular, taught by the folks on this very live stream. We work together to build this course, and has a lot of great content, and it will teach you how to get started. And then from there, there is a host of content out there that you can leverage. But if you're looking for a really safe, smooth transition to get started, check out our YouTube channel. We have a brand new course that we think you're really going to enjoy. Thanks for asking. All right. Is there any plan to have built-in state management?
Oh, excellent question. I would say currently not. And one of the reasons for this is state management is one of those things where different solutions will be needed for different problems, different kinds of applications. It's not a one-size-fits-all problem. And so in the past, when we've looked at this, there hasn't really been one pattern that stood out as like, we could recommend this to everyone and not have, like not create problems for certain kinds of applications. We have an amazing state management community in Angular. There are a number of projects like NGRX, NGXS, RX Angular, State Adapt. And in fact, while we've been working on signals, which kind of touches and dovetails with state management, we have a working group with all of our community projects and our authors of state management systems where we're exploring with them, we're testing ideas. They've been kind of giving us their input from day one on how can we build signals to support the kinds of things that their state management solutions need.
Why not borrow some performance optimizations from places like Quick? I was going to say QWick. Yeah, Quick.
Quick, yeah. We are actively investing in server-side rendering, right? Kind of partial hydrations on our roadmap. We absolutely look at what is going on in the ecosystem. We also look at kind of the cost of current applications and how much Angular would need to change to support some of these things. So there are questions of like, can we do streaming in server-side rendering? Can we do kind of like static initial load and resuming of components or event handlers rather than the hydration techniques that we use today? Can we lazy load individual event listeners? All of these things are on the table. All of them require kind of months or if not years of research to kind of understand how would that impact the Angular ecosystem and how can we deliver some of these things kind of to you and bring you with us.
Yeah, there's no quick fixes.
But are there any other things that we can at least hint at, Jessica and Andrew? Anything we can hint at where we're learning from other folks when it comes to optimizations for server-side rendering?
I mean, in some respects, yes. There's collaborative work going on. I mean, we're also like learning from other frameworks all the time. We're talking with other framework authors. We have regular communications with them. There's some internal to Google collaboration that's happening, particularly around the exact same thing we talked about earlier with partial hydration and the event, being able to keep track of the events that we need to be able to keep track of. So when people click on things, that interaction still occurs. We have short-term and long-term views, and there's a lot is really what it comes down to. But know that there's a plan, and we are working on it. We are thinking through it and having a lot of conversations very regularly about these things. So.
Yeah, Angular has a sister team at Google that is kind of how many of Google's largest, most trafficked applications, up to and including search, have done their server-side rendering. And as we've been looking into server-side rendering, we're kind of working with them, and they're helping us understand some of the design space and the constraints here.
Fantastic. What about prettier support? What do you mean? Have you seen me? Come on. Okay. Any communication on that?
They're saying we need to be prettier? I mean, that's hard to do.
Yeah, it's hard for us to get any better. I mean, like, look at us. Seriously. No, but seriously, is there any prettier support here? Anything we could talk about?
I actually do not know what the plans are for formatters. As far as prettier support for the new template syntax, we definitely want to make sure that like whatever we're using in the CLI or our kind of recommended toolchain for Angular templates does support syntax formatting.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, friends, we're just about out of time. Let's take one more question. Let's see. All right. Mikhail says, does the new flow support things like observable pipe async as item?
Yes.
Good. Good answer. In the RFC syntax, can we natively support template assignment without ngIf? For example, nglet.
Yeah, that's the subject of active discussion, I would say. It's something we've looked at doing in the past. There are some aspects of the way change detection works that make it challenging because, again, like templates are not executed code. And so we want to make sure if we do it in a way that doesn't create kind of surprising behavior.
Sounds good. Let's see. Okay, so we said that track by will be mandatory. How will the migration to NG4s that don't have track, will they just be skipped?
NG4 has a kind of a default tracking that it uses if you don't declare a track by, which is track by identity. And so the migration will just automatically explicitly specify track by identity if you're not using a track by function today. So we opt you into the default tracking that NG4 had.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have. This is our wonderful live stream crew for today. Thank you to Kevin for being our moderator and helping us get all your questions put on the screen. Big shout out to Andrew, Jessica, Alex. Thanks for answering your questions. And wait, big shout out to you at home. You know why? Because you spent time with us answering these questions and making sure that we hear your feedback. The Angular community is only as good as its members, and you, friends, are very good. So here's what we'll say. Thanks for being awesome, and we'll encourage you to go build great apps. We see you the next time.